with us a bailout critic who says, quote, taxpayers are getting gamed. Governor Mark Sanford, Republican of South Carolina. Governor Sanford, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate your taking the time. Sorry, my tongue's a bit twisted today, sir. Why are we getting gamed?
Getting gamed because we've heard a succession of different promises, and none of them have yielded the result that everybody talks about.
And you're talking specifically on autos?
When the first, well, no, I'm talking about bailout after bailout after bailout. I'm talking about the first round of stimulus checks. We're going to take care of the problem. That's about $150 billion. Then we got to $2.3 trillion in stimulus for the year. Then we passed $7 trillion of stimulus for the year, and it hadn't happened. And now we're hearing, well, if you do automotive, or if you bail out states, or you do some infrastructure, then things will be okay. But the bottom line is this is a global problem. The global economy is $67 trillion in size. Another $150 billion amounts to 1/5 of 1%. Nobody believes that 1/5 of 1% is going to solve any problem, much less an economic one of the size that we're looking at.
So on autos in particular, you are obviously a nay.
I am, because if you look at one, the disturbing pattern of bailouts. I don't know who pays for the bailouts. I don't know who bails out the bailoutor, given the way we're stacking up debt in Washington, D.C.
Your grandchildren.
And I think that, yeah, my grandchildren. And I think that there is a real problem in the long run in terms of challenge to the dollar, given the way that we're stacking debt. But I would say very specifically with regard to the autos, what you ought to look at is the fact that Chapter 11 is the only way, at the end of the day, to make the automotive industry that we all want to be competitive here in America competitive, because it begins to shield them to make decisions that are awfully tough that won't be made if they're simply bailed out by taxpayers from across this country.
All right, so let me just ask this here, and we've been doing this to everyone in your part of the country, so
Sure.
just to get through exactly whether these companies can operate on their own or not. BMW has a plant in South Carolina, right?
They do.
Okay, so 1992, and I just want to make sure we have the facts right here. 1992, you were the one that really ushered in the whole concept of all these foreign automakers that now operate across the southern part of this nation with a package that was...
That's giving me credit where... No. That's giving me credit where credit wasn't due. I wasn't involved in politics in 1992.
Well, your state, I'm sorry. Whoever was the governor at the time.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right, so what was that ultimately worth? The numbers I have is it was ultimately worth about $150 million in a combination of tax breaks, incentives, whatever it might have been, for BMW to come to South Carolina.
Sure. I would make this distinction, a couple of distinctions actually. One, there is a big difference between offering stimulus for an industry that in this case set up the first the first manufacturing facility ever in North America, in offering an inducement to come from some other part of the world or some other state to your state. There's a big difference between that and offering a bailout. So I'd make a distinction there. But the big one is this. I think that every state ought to have its own prerogative as to what it wants to do to stimulate its economy. And when when the taxpayers of South Carolina elected to offer this inducement to pull BMW to create the first manufacturing facility in North America, they didn't ask taxpayers in Michigan or in Tennessee or in California to pay for it. They paid for it as South Carolinians. And it is, these people that say, well, hey, this is kind of the same. It is apples and oranges, because in this case, the folks in Michigan are saying, why don't we get folks in South Carolina and Florida and Alabama and a whole bunch of other states to pay for our bailout? The two are completely apples and oranges.
All right, two quick questions from that, though. First, sure, we're clear. Would you offer the same sort of incentives to Ford or General Motors had they been willing to open plants there? And I know, obviously, the big caveat would have been no union, right?
Well, yeah, obviously, but that goes back to the whole core of the issue of competitiveness. Yeah. At the end of the day, stimulus is not borrowed money to write yet another check out of Washington, D.C. on borrowed money that we stick on our kids and grandkids. Stimulus is a much broader thing, whether it's card check program, whether it's the value of the dollar and its stability, whether it's trade practice, since 80% of the world economy is outside of our shores. It's a lot broader thing. So as to specific incentives here in South Carolina, I'm not a particularly big fan of incentives. We, in fact, had a press conference yesterday in saying what we ought to be about the business of when we think about economic stimulus that we can offer here in our state is lowering the marginal rate. And so we proposed yesterday, as a part of our budget that we'll release in January, a proposal that would end the corporate income tax, which is now 5%, and take it 0%, and basically halve the income tax, the personal income tax, from 7% down to 3.65%. So I think that we got to look much more broadly than simply borrowing more money to solve a problem that was created by too much borrowing.
One final question, sir, just to make sure that we're intellectually consistent. Textiles used to be a big part in the Carolinas. Furniture, obviously, used to be a big part, and obviously those industries have taken huge hits. Have you received any help from the federal government to make up for those job losses?
No, you raise a great another point. There's a whole other irony. You know, as the furniture business got decimated in North Carolina, I don't remember there being a bailout program for furniture manufacturers. As the textile industry, whether in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, or other states up and down the Atlantic seaboard got decimated, there was not a bailout for textiles. I think that Adam Smith notion of creative destruction, of at times you're going to win, at times you're going to lose in the marketplace, is vital if we're going to keep a market-based economy, as opposed to moving a political-based economy wherein if you got the right lobbyist in Washington, D.C., and if you can make enough noise, then you get the golden tap on the shoulder and money out of Washington.
Governor Sanford, thank you very much. Interesting conversation. I think our viewers hopefully found that the case as well.